Hello, hello. Can you all hear me okay? Yes. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Dancing Dialogues. This is the fourth edition of the series. Previously, there has been conversations around theory, inclusion, and repertoire. And if you happen to miss them, you can find them online on the P.A.R.T.S website. And future ones will be around composition, body studies, coaching, and feedback. So if you're interested in these conversations, make sure to check the website for further information on when these talks will be happening. So the series of Dancing Dialogues is a series of conversations that has been initiated by P.A.R.T.S as a way to highlight the work of teachers who contribute to the school, while also creating spaces to reflect more broadly on the field. So today's edition will focus on dance technique, and we'll be speaking with a panel of teachers who have all taught at P.A.R.T.S, but also remain active in many contexts. Most of you here are familiar with how P.A.R.T.S works, but for those of you maybe at home who are not, the way that P.A.R.T.S invites the teachers are in condensed modules. So next to teaching, you're doing other activities, teaching other places. So the pedagogy is always contextualized with other things that are happening in the field. I think maybe that's interesting to say because it's not necessarily the model everywhere. So, you know, the conversation might have to do a bit with that. And we'll be exploring, perspectives on dance technique. There will be some time in the end also for questions, so if you have any burning questions, you can write them down, and at the end there will be some time. I will start by briefly introducing the people in the panel. Those of you who are here probably already know everyone, but yes, I will do it anyhow. So we have to our right, Laura Aris, is a performer and dance maker, was a longtime member of Última Vez between 1999 and 2009. And since then, she has developed her own work and has been teaching internationally for over 25 years. Right here, we have Salva Sanchez, who's a dancer and choreographer, graduate from P.A.R.T.S. He has collaborated with Mark van Roonsten and Teresa de Keersmaker and has created over 20 works of his own, while also playing a central role in shaping the pedagogical development of P.A.R.T.S. After 25 years working as a choreographer, dancer, and teacher, he now works as a data analyst, following studies in psychology and data science. We have David Hernandez, who is a choreographer and multidisciplinary performer with over 30 years of experience across dance, music, and performance. He has collaborated with artists such as Meg Stewart and Teresa de Keersmaker, while also developing his own choreographic work. Alongside this, he has developed an extensive pedagogical practice across institutions, including P.A.R.T.S, Arts au Carré in Charleroi, P.A.R.T and Zagreb Academy. And then finally, we have Rakesh Sukesh, who's a performer, choreographer, producer, and teacher, whose works bridges the cultural artistic worlds of Baradam in Europe. He has developed his own movement approach, turtling, for over more than 15 years. His choreographic work has been presented internationally, and as a performer, he has collaborated with multiple companies such as Última Vez. So we have a very rich and diverse panel, as you can see. And finally, I'll introduce myself very briefly. I'm Julia Rubio Subiros. I'm also a former P.A.R.T.S student. And since graduating, I've encountered a wide range of movement vocabularies in the performing projects that I've been a part of. There's been from as maybe expected, postmodern formal dance technique, to rollerblading, to singing. I've had to do really all sorts of different things with a lot of pleasure. But then, you know, we are speaking of a field that is incredibly diverse in its output, but this plurality doesn't only exist in the landscape once you're a professional, but also it is reflected in the education of it. So contemporary dance educations might include classes like ballet, martial arts, somatic techniques, Pilates, yoga, like you name it. And I think also different programs are experimenting with how to stretch and broaden the multiplicity of things that it includes. But then we also have something called contemporary dance technique. Exactly. So this is kind of a word that not everyone has. It's hard to define nowadays. Everyone has kind of their take on it. But I think this is also what is exciting about it. It's really plural. And although it might have specific origins, everyone is constantly making it evolve, and it's shaped in real time. which is also what I find really nice, because I find that as a teacher, everyone kind of creates their own toolbox that becomes a proposition for the field. So maybe this is, now that we've spoken about this plurality, maybe it's a good moment to speak about how each of you situates kind of where your version of contemporary dance technique is situated. What lineages does it come from? What does it relate to? Maybe Laura, do you want to start? Or does someone else have a... We go just in order.
Hello. Hi. The lineage, so I would say European American after modern dance, contemporary dance. That's so Graham, my school, or like things I got, Graham, Cunningham, Limon, but then alongside flamenco, traditional dance, what else? Escuela bolera, so like folk, but contemporary dance, I would say European American, just to be short. Traditional. No, heritage.
Shall we just go in order?
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. Yeah, my dance education was in India. I came to Europe at the age of 28, so basically everything was done there, the foundation. So I started dancing with Bollywood dance, the cinemas and stuff, and I didn't like it, I stopped. And then I joined this contemporary dance company where we trained in certain European contemporary dance, which is very new for India. It is not so common for us, so it was very unique for me. And parallelly, we were also training in some Indian classical arts, especially a martial art called P.A.R.T.S, as like a soft skill, which really called me into it. I was really driven by it, so I decided to follow certain traditional teachers, traditional schools to go more deeper into that. And also, I come from a family tradition of yogic practices. So my ancestors, my family, they're all busy with the whole yogic philosophies, and not necessarily what we see in the Instagram or Facebook, but the thing. So that's kind of like my beginning. And then later, because I experienced this Western contemporary dance, which is very unique for us, I was a bit like, oh, whoa, what is this? Why am I rolling on the floor? This feels great. So I wanted to come to Europe and kind of search for that knowledge. And so I came, I started studying with different teachers, and then I did a training on instant composition with Katie Duck, and she is based in Amsterdam. And then I met David Zambrano also, I studied a little bit with him. So that's kind of my training background.
Perfect, thank you. David, would you mind sharing?
Okay, how to keep this short, because I'm an older gentleman now. So there's been some time passed with lots of experiences. I started in urban dance and folk dance, but my main study, I was a theater kid in the States, so my main study was theater and music mostly. And a bit like Laura, I was lucky actually because I really love dancing, but I thought I was actually gonna make my career. I thought I would be the next Michael Jackson or something. So I was really in the commercial thing, but doing all the dancing stuff because I loved it. And because I was dancing in companies quite early, so I did also Cunningham, Graham, Limon, all these different base techniques of modern dance, and eventually got into what was being called release technologies at that time. And so that kind of, it was interesting to have seen and had an intense experience with how the moderns had set things up, which I have a big respect for, which was choreographically specific technique. If you wanted to dance in Graham's company, you studied Graham because the material was in the class that would be on stage. And then we get into this zone where we're like, oh, but what about if you want to train people to do lots of different kinds of things? How do you wrap your mind around that? And what kind of thing do you create for this? So when I was collaborating with Meg, I was kind of rehearsal directing in one of the, well, Versatile directing is a big word. We weren't that organized. I was assisting a lot, and I was training people. And the work was very distorted and harder on the body, so you had to ask yourself questions. What kind of things do people need to be able to enable this kind of choreographic endeavor? And a lot of my own personal research was really important in terms of how to develop a pedagogy that made sense for giving people a base, but allowing them from that base to spring out into whatever direction that they would want to go. And so that moment, I was quite young. When I first started teaching at P.A.R.T.S, I think I was like 26. And some of the students were kind of my age. So we just talked. I would always not tell them how old I was, because I thought they wouldn't listen to me if they knew. But that brought into this kind of idea of like, okay, this practicality of like, I get in the studio, I discover things, I create things that can share that with other people. And that's been kind of the through line for everything that I've built since then. The practical aspect of it, with some reverence to everything that had been built before, because I think I had this feeling that like, okay, that generation did a lot of really cool things. How are we bridging into the future? Do we just repeat what we've been taught, or do we try to take it and move it on in some way?
Thank you. Salva?
Yes. Well, in a way, I started dancing at P.A.R.T.S. This is maybe not very accurate because I did take some classes before, but P.A.R.T.S. I was a student in the first generation, 1995, and P.A.R.T.S. was the first place where I danced every day. I had studied theater before. I had studied theater in what was called the physical theater department, where we did lots of mime, pantomime, classical pantomime with Polish teachers, hardcore stuff, fencing. I had followed Aikido classes, which was a big influence on me. And then I came to P.A.R.T.S, and I didn't think seriously that I was going to become a dancer. My idea was to come to a dance school to steal knowledge, to bring it back to theater or physical theater or whatever. But I got immediately trapped, and I was fascinated by it. And then I sort of as a reaction, I wanted to go all the way. I was immediately most interested in exactly that, precisely that which I thought I was not capable of, which was the core of dance, technique. As a P.A.R.T.S student, I think then I entered the stream of mostly American postmodern dance, although we had an eclectic panel of influences. Finally, what influenced me most was that. David Zambrano was a very important figure for me. I met him outside of P.A.R.T.S and while I was a first-year student here, and then he joined as a teacher. And I think Lance Grease, who was a former Trisha Brown dancer, I think he is the person that made me a dancer, centrally, with the collaboration of many fascinating and important teachers, each giving their contribution, but I think there's something that he did to my bones, or something that I can't really define, but that went very deep. And we also worked with him many hours. And the program of P.A.R.T.S back then was not so overloaded with a diversity of teachers. We would have 3, maximum 4 teachers of dance technique, be it ballet or contemporary, in 1 year, and they would return the 2nd year and the 3rd year. So, yeah, I guess that's where I come from. At the same time, connecting with something you said, as I started teaching, I never really chose any of those streams and made it a mission to transfer that as such. I recognize all those influences in myself. I know they're there. Sometimes I don't know how they have played out or what they have created. But what I have been afterwards interested in teaching or transmitting has much more to do with the question you were talking about of how do we enable people with a sense of awareness, a certain power, and a certain skill to do whatever it is that they want to do, which maybe they don't know what it is, we don't know, and we still want to enable it. So
I'm going to take this to bridge to the second question because you're actually already on that, so this can flood the doors to that, which is that indeed, as you say, the fact that you come from somewhere doesn't mean that you reproduce exactly that. So in your transformation of this knowledge, when you prepare a class, what are the central values and the core principles, and also like specifically, technically, in the classroom, but also more broadly in terms of artistic sensibilities, and what are your aims that you're trying to transmit? And maybe since you were already starting, we can continue and take the opposite direction this time.
okay. Okay, that's a big question, indeed.
Yeah, for this one, we can take a bit of time because
Sure,
indeed
sure.
everyone will have many things to say.
Okay, I guess I also, I never, I can look back at what I have done teaching and figure that out now retrospectively. You know, like you learn to teach along the way. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but the first year I taught, I don't know what I was teaching. I guess I was just like repeating some exercises that I had learned, giving them a twist. And over time, you start figuring out, and what it has become, what my classes became eventually, was actually a technical class about what technique can be or could be, and what it is for someone to be technical, and how being technical can be of service to a dancer or a performer. So there's sort of like a meta or recursive nature to my class, in the sense that I propose a reflection on what technique is while practicing technique. And I make that explicit. I tend to say that on the first day of class. I say, we're not just going to learn a technique, we're going to think practically and in movement. Movement is a very important part of it. I'll explain you why. We're going to, by doing, we're going to train ourselves to be technical. And I'm going to try to get you into that trip so that you find ways in which being technical can be of use. And what for me being technical is, it certainly has to do with awareness. It has to do with discovering mechanisms and being able to act on those mechanisms. But very importantly, it has to do also with integrating and forgetting that rational approach of awareness towards the mechanisms. I say sometimes it's like the technical work I propose, it's like opening a box, looking at how it works, touching a few things, making it work better, but very importantly, closing the box at the end. Because I think, and I'm very convinced about this, and I've also then studied in psychology, that the neuromuscular unit works best when you're not thinking about how it works. So there is a time to open the box, to tune it, to change it, but if you want it to work well, you have to close it, and then you have to move. And when you move, you're not thinking about how you move. Roughly put. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I'm kind of a nerd, so I could go too long about this. So let me just try to condense. I think I've always been my own reason to teach, because I was teaching myself as I was working with other people, and that's from a really young age. So that means, the reason I mention that is because I feel like it's just an ongoing process. As long as I live and teach, I will keep asking the questions. And every time there's a new experience or a new kind of work that comes up, I'm like, oh, you know, because technique is just a method to do something. And contemporary is a brand. So contemporary technique, that brand, when it's outside of the word of the brand, means today. So how do we do things today? So I'm always kind of approaching it from this point of view of like, okay, you know, and the history of how being lucky to be part of the history of how dance develops, that question keeps kind of resonating again and again. On a certain level, I think trying to give students that I'm working with the chance to kind of experience patterns, create neural pathways, create musculature that supports the neural pathways, that all of these kind of things, that you kind of create a physical intelligence of a certain sense by sometimes rudimentary things, but also not forgetting the animal and instinctive side of the dancing and trying to stimulate that kind of work as well so people don't get stuck in skills. And I think the balance between those two things of creating a system in someone with tools that they can pull upon whenever they need without being weighed down by those tools seems to be like a main point of interest. And so that does everything from creating etudes and things that people can experience certain principles inside that they can repeat and refine, like a musician plays scales. A lot of my thinking also about the building of the pedagogy comes from my musical experience because that was my main training, and how much I hated scales and how much I needed to keep doing the scales, because when you stop doing them for a week, some of the neural pathways started to break down and the muscles were not as adept at pulling those things out. And it was not to be the best scale player, it was because when I would see a C major scale in a music, I didn't even have to think about it. It just flew out of my fingers, you know? And so that, as an example of like, okay, we do that hardcore training, so you don't have to think about it, connecting to what he was saying. And it's just something at your availability when you want to do whatever it is you want to do. And I think the final thing is doing it in the most healthy way possible, even when the material you're investigating is not maybe very healthy.
Sorry, can you ask me the question again?
Yes. So the question has to do about you might have trained whatever you trained, but then when you develop your own pedagogy and you put something forth, and of course this is an evolving question, but generally, or maybe today, what are the most central priorities that you put forth?
Okay. In my case, I chose to develop this research from things that I learned, and also which comes from a very specific context. It's very different than where I am now, and also how knowledge passed on, and what is a knowledge, what is this technique was. It's very different than where I am at the moment. And so over the years, I devised a sort of a pedagogy and methodology which can fit into variable environments. So based on the different environments, what I offer or what I see that necessary changes. So some space I go, there's community that just likes to move a lot and they want to focus physicality a lot. So there we focus a lot on the physical work. And maybe some place they're already a great artist and they want to kind of understand this technique that I'm offering for them to use it for their own artistic work. So I try to kind of place the class plan differently based on different places. But my work is an interconnected practice. So it's not just about the body movement, but it encompasses everything as a human being.
Okay, so I think that I started teaching when I started working when I was very young, and as I said, I did Graham and all these so-called techniques that I never danced on those things. So I think the work taught me how to work. I had some of technical knowledge of anatomic technical knowledge on my pockets, but I would say that for me technique there is, perhaps it's good just to start there, no? Like what is technique, because then we could stay there for already for an hour. But so it's something that it protects yourself, no? It's just it's for your own safety and protection, to expand the, I would say, is to expand the possibilities of movement. And I don't say dance, I say movement. And then what for? And for me, that's the main question. What for? I don't know what they're gonna do, because I cannot see the future. But I was there, or I am still there, because I'm still a student. I think we all still practitioners, so I consider myself a student. So just roles keeps on changing. So when I'm teaching, well, I take that role, but I observe movement, and I'm curious about movement, and I'm still a dancer. And so what for? For me means artistic purpose. So if I think professional dancer, I think artistic purpose, that I would say. Then under my experience, I had to build new techniques to be able to, so what for, meaning at service of what? Ideas. And then my experience is that I was sometimes maybe not with the technique, or we had an idea that was like, no, it's not possible, that's crazy. And then you start, and then you figure it out with many hits, perhaps something as you said, you mentioned already, not passing through things that because you don't know, and then you build that technique. And then in that doing, because I started teaching at a very young age, I could see, oh, but that is relevant into a pedagogical context, could be taken out from that. So it goes both ways, because then when I teach, I make that technique more clear for myself, because I have to be very clear for the rest. So there's this common knowledge that we know that by teaching you become, well, more clear. I think a better dancer, or that's what I felt when I was younger. I'm becoming better, so I started liking it more and more, because I could see that it was passing through me, and the results were there, but I was also getting like, whoa, because I wanted to be a good example. So it was really, it dialogues, still dialogues. So I think the work teaches you how to work, and I don't know what's gonna be the work of tomorrow, but I have certain things, and if we speak technique, for me, there are things that we are in this planet, and then in this planet there is gravity, and if we speak professional dance, we're very privileged, not in all the countries are like this, there is a linoleum, and it's flat, and then from there I work, and then a plie is a plie, energy line is energy line, a direction is a direction, and intention is an intention. Rather, I mean, I don't know in which kind of, and then breaking a line, and all what will come next, but I think still there is so I go back, just to make it short, I went, of course, a whole spectrum of teaching, and I went older, and now, as you said, I was 21 when I started teaching. How I started teaching? Because women, the Kiwis asked me, come, and then we worked together, because I was a little bit later, and joined the company a bit later, and they said, do the warm-up. And I'm like, okay, how long? 45 minutes. And then I started doing the warm-up, and then I look, and then he said, and then 1 hour. And I looked, and I hit. And then after he said, from where you come from? Because I lead the whole class. And then very quickly I became like a workshop assistant from him. And then I developed that. So suddenly I was representing Ultima Vez, and I just joined Ultima Vez. And then, yeah, so I don't know how I was teaching by then. I was just good intentions also. But it always has been back and forth. But I would just offer this. I think there is I disagree with the term technique. I don't think, I disagree with the Graham technique, or I think there is one technique which is dealing with gravity and flat floor. I would really question that already. And I know it's yeah.
This is an interesting segue, because I was hearing you all, and so for example, David, you were bringing up the question of the études, and I'm wondering, do you happen to have a specific example in which we can see, like, concretely from your class. No, but that we can get a sense of how you're translating this thinking into an actual physical proposition, which of course it's a huge thing, so it's not that this example has to be fully englobing everything, but just to get a sense, because I'm sure even though now there seems to be kind of a similar consensus as to what we're trying to achieve, practically speaking, you all have very different classes. So I'm curious if you could offer a notion of what does it look like? No, not actually do it. Oh, I mean, if you want, but no, but just to give us a taste of.
Test.
No, no, but just to get a sense of like how do you translate this principle? Because your classes are all very different from each other. So, yeah. Maybe you need a minute to think about it, or.
Is it? I thought it was for you.
No, it's for everyone. It's for everyone.
Okay. Well, to give an example. For example, my work also, like I said, has the influences from yogic philosophies and cultures. So for me, this idea of going within and trying to becoming more and more sensitive to the subtlest part of us within. When people try to practice, they try to look for a perfect place, right? Like they go for an ashram or a 10 days silent vipassana, and where they could create a context and observe, go deeper, clear, whatever. But for me, what was kind of a primary driven force for this research that I'm doing, I'm not calling technique, I'm calling it research, is that the chaos, right? Like I finish my 10 days vipassana, then I come back to my chaos. And after 2 weeks, it's all gone. Or whatever happened, then I'm back to my social media, back to my tax, etc. So hence, in the class, there are certain tools that are devised where we train how to connect to our breath, create this sensitive, subtle awareness to our inner space while tackling chaos in space. So, as an example.
Thank you.
I maybe have one. So sometimes taking something that is a concept, like activity and passivity, when do you make things happen and when do you allow things to happen? And you can break that down. Sometimes, a lot of times I say in my class, work and ride. When you work, you engage muscle. When you ride, you engage gravity's relationship to your weight. And so to give, for instance, improvisational investigations to just explore that notion, and then often for me, I construct these etudes where there's a lot, because first you have to discover the on and the off, and then you realize it's all a spectrum, because there's little bits of on and a lot of off, and then a tiny bit of off with some on, and how do you manage all of those kind of negotiations of weight and of muscular activity over the course of a passage of movement. And so to design an etude that specifically investigates the ability to move in and out and surf that spectrum as much as possible would be an example. If that's what you mean.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
Sorry, I'm still thinking. But I do want to answer, I meant to answer your question, but I'm also thinking whether our classes are actually that different. Yeah. I'm not sure.
Sorry, can you say, I didn't hear.
I'm not sure. I don't know your class, so you're going to be the perfect excuse that breaks down my logic. But I know.
What was the question? I didn't hear the question.
No, I don't think that our classes, I know her class very well. I know his class really well. That doesn't mean I'm good at it. I know it very well. It's been a long time. But I've watched many of your classes with students, with my own. I've seen my students taking your classes, and I've had it so many times with both of you. Like, but you see, that's what I'm saying. They just say it differently. They approach it from a different side. And to the experience of a student, maybe they cannot see that because they're really in it, and maybe it is also true that the devil is in the details. But I have a very strong feeling that we're all pointing at the same place or area, and we're all getting there in a different way with a different style. And so yeah, this was just like something that I wanted to catch. How to bring our ideas of technique into reality or into a practice? I have one exercise that I think has served me, and I hope my students, to sort of, it serves sort of as a reference to what all my teaching is. And there are students of mine in the audience, and you've done perfect movement, and it's a specific exercise that has to do with the passage from commanding your body rationally, executing from a mental command that guides your movement. Starting from there, it's a protocol that takes you to completely the other side, which is following or guiding your body as your body is already in movement and it doesn't wait for you to initiate. And for me, this is as an exercise, it also works as a metaphor of a learning process. A learning process that can take 5 minutes or it can take 15 years or 25, which is the process. Sometimes I give this example, which is a bit banal, but I think it kind of works like this. If you learn how to drive a car, you have to learn that you push with the left foot in order to change gear. You release the left foot quicker than you push the gas, and then the car starts moving. And you need to think of your left leg and your right leg and your right hand and coordinate those movements. You can learn this, but you only learn, or you have only learned to drive when you look at traffic and you think, I go. And in this I go, I drive, I go into the road, the left leg, the right leg, and the hand are all integrated. And they're integrated also non-sequentially. They're integrated in a parallel fashion. So, as I was saying, I do have this one practice, exercise, which is called perfect movement, that tackles that in a very explicit way, and it gives a protocol to go through that. So very often I've thought that's all I'm teaching. I'm teaching that exercise with 50 other exercises and phrases and materials that sort of act like a scaffold in relation to perfect movement. Also because to do only perfect movement would be incredibly tedious and hard. But as a teacher, in my experience, when you come to an exercise or a practice that you feel touches something that is central, it's hard to let go of it. Like every time that I would have a new group of students, I was tempted not to teach perfect movement. And then I felt like, why should I keep that from them? If I think that this is really what it's about. So.
I don't know if it's exactly what you're asking, but like, it's like how to translate now the technical. How can you?
Is to give an example of maybe like an exercise, or of course an exercise will not explain the whole way of how you translate your principles, but it's just to have a bit of a grounded image in this.
Yeah. Okay. So, for instance, there is so many. Like you.
Yeah, choose one.
Okay. But like this week, okay, like one of the days we said, okay, just to also to break, because when we go to technique or we go from setup phrases or as examples, we also go to use, for instance, improvisation with the focus on technique, no? Because that's also, you would say, no, because some students, they come from schools where everything is separate, no? Like they go to composition class or they go to improvisation. Well, so you can also do an improvisation class based on only technique focus, but I can also improvise out of emotion or improvise. Blah, blah, blah. So these 3 weeks, one of the days I said, okay, I brought balls. And then we did the whole class with these fluffy balls, like very soft balls. Okay, and then we could do also many different things. But we did some exercise, and we were talking about energy line, that then they were creating with the ball, and instead of with your body. It's like the extension of your body, because it's like, oh, a swing, no? Then you swing the ball. So then they could see the ball going, but I could do it with a tissue as well. But besides, so that was like the elongations, because then they see the balls. But then there were some that I don't know, you throw the ball vertically, you throw the ball vertically. You don't have a ball there? No. Yeah, no, you throw the ball vertically, you know, clack, and then you take it horizontally, right? And it's really ninja, and everybody gets very high in the movement because they have to go pam, foo, no? But of course, if then I can speak about, technically I can, in just that moment I can speak about so many things. Because when they hit too hard, the ball goes foo, foo. And then I'm like, yeah, you hit the ball. I don't even have to say. So don't hit the ball, take the ball. And then there is people that they go, skla! And then they go like, skla! And then I'm like, I cannot dance with a partner that smash my hand. Like, I can't. I will not be there. And then I make a joke, I would not be dancing with you because it's too much force. And then we're talking, just use the force that you need. And they see, and then I catch them and they go, okay, generous hands, less. And then it's this, for instance, technically speaking, this little exercise, and on top is exciting because they want to grab, and it's nice also to have this, I want to, you know, also almost this competitive, yeah, I wanted to do it good and catch, and it's a very nice feeling. And so measuring, for instance, this little ball thing is extension, it's directions, and on top, sometimes I say follow the ball, and sometimes I say don't follow the ball, but you still have to catch it. So the use of eyes, calculating how, and that's the beginning of partnering. You don't want to smash the hand of the colleague, you have to calculate somebody jumping at you, if you have to go to them or go give them more space, and it's just little fluffy balls that they're not ecological, they're from Decathlon. Really not ecological, but they are so good, for example. And they have fun, and we don't do my phrase.
My next question is actually, I'd like to continue with you, Laura, which is that we were speaking earlier about the fact that even though you teach students of all levels, professionals, that oftentimes, sometimes you get first-year students. It's a common thing in different institutions, and when, especially, you know, when it's a first year, there's sometimes not yet a homogenized group. People have different backgrounds, different levels of technique, different senses of their own body. So what is like what you find the important things to establish when you face a group like this?
So the first thing I question is like, okay, to whom I teach, what for? So I adapt to that. I always get very nervous before, I never sleep good before to face a new group when I don't know them. Because you have to adapt, you have all the cards, but you have to sort of adapt, and sometimes it's more difficult and sometimes not. I have been in amazing generations. Like, I have been dancing with people that it was a pleasure to step aside and say, if you like this, wait, because they are coming. Like, I had this feeling so much, so many years. And this is something that some things in these same generations, companies, not only Women at the because I dance also with other companies, and I learned so much in those, like, it was so amazing. And some things of that time I don't want to transmit. There are many things I learned there that I don't want. I want to stop, that doesn't go. But some things, yes. And healthy, cool group dynamic where you save each other as, and you know they're gonna be there for you, and sometimes, you know, and that you can really, I think a group dynamic, you push limits, you know. It's not only, I say sometimes, like, be nice, but don't be too nice. It's like, you don't help you. Dance together, but don't wait for each other. Like, no, this is so, like, I call it, sometimes you have these dream teams. Why? There is a degree of magic, but there is a degree of magic on research, you know. We go into the unknown, and you go, I don't know. You can now talk, but there is this degree of magic. And this, sometimes you can there is a power from the outside and there is power from the inside. And I have been inside and outside. So that's what the first thing, in fact, that's the first thing I try to do in a group. And technically, that's also kind of, yeah, I don't know, like that's why I think that people ask me. Diversity, then going back to really the core of the question, I opened the question because for me, I would say when I think diversity, it's getting harder and harder. Before there were some filters, and then I would say, what's the filter of nowadays is a question, an open question. Is there a filter? Because, you know, sometimes I have people that they come with all these, I want to, and I want to. Some they don't even know why they are there, but I think that all the doctors I go, the trigger was I really want to be a doctor. I want to believe all the doctors I go, they treat me, but it's not enough. So then it comes the technical part as well. And yeah, now I think I got too holistic, no? But diversity, what's the feel? It's just getting very, and I just try to put people together, like, let me finish just. So I think I did many things in the years and I had many thoughts and this is changing, it's happening more, it's getting more and more of a challenge. And I think I'm going more and more to the ground. I'm going more and more to the basics. And I go out because like at P.A.R.T.S, I do technical class an hour and a half, but normally I teach 5 hours. So I go to the spectrum of many other things and we do many other things besides. And sometimes even I say, like, for instance, what I choose, some of the things that I do that I still believe they are very relevant, I don't do them anymore. I'm still able to do them, but then we go back to I have it integrated, I don't think about it. I don't need to pass my own technical class to be technical, but I'm a researcher and I love movement, so I'm still thinking about movement and to get more technical, but in so many different ways. But if you don't have the base technique, you cannot follow. Sometimes you have these groups that they are maybe less diverse or diversity, or within the diversity, the level of understanding is higher and it's so fun because then I get also. So there is no end. Like when it ends technique, when you're totally ready, I don't know, like I get confused. I don't know if I answer what I had to answer, but I just open questions.
Well, what I heard also specifically is going to the ground. As
fundamentals.
Yes.
But like fundamentals, it's like, I don't know, an architect has to be really in dialogue with the guy who's gonna actually do the thing, technically. Like that they're gonna build, you know, like you need to know the weight of the brick. You need to know every brick weights, like you need to incorporate, you need to, it's practice. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone want to briefly respond?
I can say a little thing about that.
Yes.
I think, and I have a feeling that's a common thing between us all, but I kind of approach individuals. Like I'm really bad at knowing who was in what generation with who. I meet the people and then we open up a kind of laboratory situation and we work, and I'm still working. And so I do think though an interesting point of that when you approach it like that, and something that maybe mirrors a little bit how technique in the time period that we're calling contemporary has evolved, was that you start to see people who are retraining, untraining, and training. And that's kind of an interesting mix. And that's a bit the diversity, what we're kind of talking about. I've seen people that did their first ballet class in the P.A.R.T.S audition that come from hip hop and jump in the thing next to a ballerina that's been studying since she was 4 years old when she had her first thing. And they've got to work together in a space on the same ideas. And this is fascinating and kind of interesting because we get to the fundamentals and to the ground in a way, but it's also realizing that also a lot of the things that I touch upon, in my understanding of it, what was called in the 90s release technologies, which I always kind of hated, but that's another discussion, was initially a lot about retraining. So line in the body and things like this had come from somewhere else, and then now we're gonna look for efficiency, and we're gonna look for gravity, and we're gonna look for all of these things. But what do you do when someone starts their training with this information? Okay, now I have to kind of think in another way. And what do I do when someone starts their training like that next to somebody who is retraining? Okay, and this kind of eventually becomes a kind of distillation process down to like, what is the basic truth that I'm trying to share? And in what way can I get that communicated to many different bodies at the same time?
I'm going to piggyback on that to ask you a following question, which is that, I mean, you mentioned it briefly before that you started teaching at 26 here. How was it to be because you taught in the 3 years mostly, most often in blocks. How is it to develop your pedagogical practice through each generation, through each year? How was that for you?
Well, it was also interesting because it has to be said that the program was sometimes 2 years,
Yes,
sometimes
indeed.
3 years. Was it ever 4? Was there a moment where it was
Yes.
4, I think,
Yeah.
even? So, well, with the masters, you mean? Yeah. So there was there was all these different ways that was kind of evolving also. So each time, because I guess I'm the grandpa up here, I've been here since kind of the beginning a little bit, to kind of surf how those things were changing. And we also, for a big period of the time, I was the red line on the contemporary side through the program. So that meant I had a lot of time with these people, and I was teaching also improv and composition. And so the reason I mentioned, because I was like Laura, I started quite a lot earlier because I also came from not a wealthy family in Miami, and I needed to make money, and I needed to teach myself to dance, so that's how I started teaching. And you develop things already, and then I started doing a lot of company classes all over the place, which then you had to kind of like, why am I here and what for, you know, a lot. And then the minute that this became like a position for me, suddenly you're like, oh, I have to follow people for 2 to 4 years. And I have to find a way to be part of that evolution over the long term. And that suddenly changes things a lot. Because let's face it, if we didn't work in institutions, we could teach the same 1 week or 2 week workshop everywhere, all over the place. I don't think any of us would, because I know these people and everybody's a researcher here, so you get bored yourself and you start digging on other things. But basically, you could teach the same thing. So suddenly having a mandate to kind of go like, okay, these people are gonna, and there was even this crazy moment, do you remember that? There was a moment where there was this idea that was thrown out. There was me, Lance, and Randy Warshaw that were working at the same time in the school. And it was like, everybody's gonna have their own year. So David's gonna have his David people, and Randy's gonna have his Randy people, and Lance is gonna have his, so you would follow a group for the 3 years mainly working with you, and I was horrified. I was like, why would you do that? You have this wealth of possibility with these 3 people, and like, I don't feel like I can also go like, oh, I can be responsible. And then you start getting in the scorecard of like, how many people in my group got jobs? And how many people in your group got jobs? You know, like, no, it's absurd. But it starts to be kind of maybe a reflection, the reason I mentioned it, on the way that in parts we were always questioning every generation. How does this have to go? How does this have to unfold? And there was a very direct dialogue between those of us that were kind of mainly present and how the program was being formed, and to make it finish. I think that became a continual question, but one that I'd never had to ask before in that kind of scenario.
Yes.
Just quickly, because I remember, I also have a hard time to know which discussion happened when and linked to what year and what generation, but I do know that there was a lot of talk at some point on that issue, and maybe that's actually later than what you're referring to. The issue of how to deal with the eclectic nature of the program that has been a heritage since day one of P.A.R.T.S. Thinking the P.A.R.T.S got founded upon these 3 artistic pillars: Pina Bausch, Trisha Brown, and Forsyth. And well, the weight through history has been uneven of those three heritages. But it is nevertheless the case that students come to a place to be confronted with not just a diversity of influences, but to a certain extent also an opposition of influences, which the paradigm or the main example of it was the choice of starting the program with ballet and postmodern techniques in the training roster. So somehow there was a bit of like an itch or a desire to, over the years, to find a way of bringing those together, maybe not erase the eclecticism, but to give it a more unified or organized or integrated sense through the designing of the program. And there was an impossibility of how to make that, how do you make that real? How do you program? How do you, but I think that I spoke at that point. I remember I was in New York and I spoke to Randy. This was years after he had been here. And I mentioned to him, I said, well, we're realizing that we're pulling the students one way and the other. We're telling them to do this, and then 2 weeks later we're telling them to do that, and then in the afternoon they do theater, and then, like, how can we, like, bring it together? How can we make them, focus? How can we unify that? It's too diverse. And then he said to me, but you're every day there working with your body. You're doing the same all the time. It's just a matter of zooming in or out, when you're in the middle of it, you're looking so close that you see too many details. But in another way, it's also possible to say, well, we're a bunch of people, a bunch of students that have devoted 3 to 4 to 5 years of their life to wake up, have breakfast, work physically, with different dynamics, with different intensity, but nevertheless, work with their body as an instrument, and then go back to sleep, and then go at it the next day. And there's maybe enough unity in that, it's a question, it's a struggle, and it's a discussion that I think is interesting and that has fed a lot of the thinking behind the programming or the designing of the program at P.A.R.T.S.
Yeah, but it is true that sometimes things, you need to sleep over things, and it takes time, we all know. And sometimes I find it's a bit, especially with diversity, or before, it also was diverse, but sometimes also even people in P.A.R.T.S would come with already more, because now they really come from not at P.A.R.T.S and everywhere, it's like, what I want to say is that sometimes in these dance programs that I have the feeling I'm grading, I have difficulties because I'm grading at people digesting information. And it's not very nice feeling because I don't know, like it's like 2 more weeks would go somewhere else. And so I think it can be still confusing. I mean, it's complex, still be complex, but I agree with what you said. Because it builds, at the end it builds. And I mean, when also sometimes I tell when people are complaining about the schools or like the program, and I go like, what would you do? No, like if you design the program, do you take ballet out? Like as a student, like what do you want or how you would do that? No, that's it.
Shouldn't it always be an experiment? I think that's the thing, no? I'm kind of anti-codification too much. Like if it starts to be, okay, this is fixed in stone, like it should always be in process. I remember even that was the thing that we used to say, like every generation, it was like, what does this generation need? And the program would adapt to what the generation needs. And I think for me, that was one of the thrills and why I think I've stuck around so long was because of that question, because it was a place where that was happening. That question was happening, and I was involved in that dialogue, which made it exciting to kind of, it's an experiment all the time.
I'd love to take this actually to even focus this a bit more, and I'm going to start with you, Sava, and then open it to the rest of us, which is through all the years that you've been teaching at P.A.R.T.S or not at P.A.R.T.S, have you seen differences in the student body throughout the years? Have they needed things, like were there things that before were more relevant to teach that now you don't teach anymore, or vice versa? In all these years of experimenting in this process, how has the relationship of the student body, what they give back to you also, how does that then shape also what you bring? What is that feedback through time?
It's difficult to make sense of the differences. Like for me I mean, it's very clear that if I take P.A.R.T.S as an example, and it's very strong at P.A.R.T.S, but it's not the only place where this happens. One group is different than the next generation, and that generation different than the next. But if I start to interpret that in any way that comes close to understanding youth over the last 30 years, it's a fuzzy territory. I'm not even sure that the sample of 30 to 40 people at P.A.R.T.S is representative of youth or of human, I don't know. These are like people handpicked from a bunch of different countries according to a non-unified standard, and who are going through heavy part of their life, even when they're happy as bells. And it's very hard to interpret for me. In the history of P.A.R.T.S, I do feel that there was a curve of, it's a bit tempting. I wonder if it makes sense what I'm going to say, but I think there was a curve of growing skill and capacity that was in parallel, going in parallel with the expansion of P.A.R.T.S as a sort of powerhouse player in the educational field in Europe, and very specifically with the capacity of P.A.R.T.S of going to more and more countries to select among a bigger and bigger pool of students that would have P.A.R.T.S as their choice number one in Europe. And that kind of peaked and changed because we were suddenly not the only school that had that agenda or that power. And so also for students, for potential students, P.A.R.T.S was not necessarily the evident number one choice. So, I think I was lucky to be in the first generation. That's also something that we say, all my generation, we all say like, 3 years later, they would have never picked us. Because they chose me among 300 people, but then a few years later, I was selecting, because I was responsible for selection, we eventually got to see over 1,200 people to be pre-selected for the final audition. So there, it's not like it's mathematically one-to-one. Like, it's not just because of that you get the best or the most talented, but you really, like the bar goes high. And I did see that change over generations. Now, how that translates into the class, it's complicated because the class is more than a talent experiment, it's a sociological experiment. And I really believe that what ends up mattering and what ends up dominating the experience of people in a school is relationships and being together. And that's something that for me, when you talked about diversity, that's something that to me is a crucial thing that I've thought a lot about without reaching any conclusion, but I have very present, that is that dancing is a social, learning to dance is a social event. You don't learn to dance one-to-one, like a violin player will go pick up a violin master and then be in a room alone, just student and master. And I think it's a good thing that it's like that, because I think the fact that you're 20 or 15 students and one teacher, I think there's a lot of potential in that, but there's also lots of friction. And there is a basic contradiction that it is you're being asked to work on yourself together with other people that are working on themselves. And yourself or your body, actually not so much yourself, but your body, and I try to make that difference, being the subject of work. I think in theater it's more tricky because then in theater you come to closer to yourself being the subject of work. And I like that. For me, coming from theater, for me it was a relief that it was not about me, that it was about my instrument. You know. But anyway, there is that a little bit that contradiction and that potential. You know, like there's I often tell my students that knowledge is generated communally. So I ask them to participate, and their presence is also a kind of participation, but questions and comments are adding to that. And I really believe that the most interesting discoveries that we've had in class happened because there was a proactive atmosphere, and people were commenting on each other. But it's a tricky thing to deal with, this double nature of like learning to work on yourself while being with others.
Can I nuance the question also, and maybe the answer is still the same? When speaking about a student body, indeed, as you mentioned, it's people who are in a young moment of their life. They are also themselves being traversed by, it's maybe the first time they leave their home, maybe the politics of what is going on is also really present. Has any of these, not such, I mean, in the sense of like when dialoguing with the students, have the students in any moment like placed certain demands also that have translated into the class and made some kind of dialogue happen in that way throughout the years? I'm also opening the question in this level, besides only a technique level. But I don't know if you want to add or if we just open this to others.
I was going to talk about exactly that, because I think it's hard. I agree what Salva says. I mean, for me, P.A.R.T.S is like a petri dish. And you throw all these people in it and you're like, good luck, swim, you know, like, and they try and they bounce off each other and da-da-da-da. That's always been, so that's a certain common factor, but the parameters that are playing on that little experiment shift all the time. And I feel like what I've noticed over the course of things, and you do have the push and pull, you know, like somebody reads the No Manifesto and comes and like, why do I need to train in technique at all? You know, and you know, like you get all of these kind of things, you know, which is kind of the nature of the beast. Like, isn't that what you're supposed to do? Push against the boundaries, but there need to be boundaries to push against. So, you know, but the thing that maybe I've noticed evolving, which is weird and maybe delicate to talk about, is because we have all of these different people from very different experiences from all over the world. And I guess what I'm kind of noticing is that there were certain backgrounds or experiences that came in with more worry than others. And as our universe and our world is evolving the way it's evolving, I think there's a little bit more of a unifying worry that I'm starting to see pop up in students that I meet in a lot of different places. Unifying is maybe a big word because I don't know if it actually unifies, but more common experience of like, whoa, you know, where things like you mentioned, politics of certain things become more present. And that for me, as someone who comes from a very specific background of right-wing fundamentalist American ideology, the studio space and the working space was always a place to kind of purify myself from a lot of those things and to find my humanity devoid of those things. And so I think that's something that I try to kind of keep present as much as I can in the space, but where you also notice that you've seen different generations of plenty, even in terms of like the shows you go to see and the money that's flying around and ideas that people can have and make real. And then you see a shift from that, and that students come in with a different set of questions and a different set of realities into like, how can I spend 3 years of my life working on myself and on this kind of research in the scenario I find myself in today. And I do feel that's something that has evolved in a way at P.A.R.T.S or in a lot of other places, that I think there were more possibilities at a certain time for people to kind of like maybe let that go for a minute, and now it's encroaching upon us, and I can feel that encroaching happening.
Do either of you want to comment?
Just to add something on top of it. I mean, I'm not speaking specifically from P.A.R.T.S context because I spend very less time here, but I'm also working with different communities. Indeed, I see a change in what is the room, every room, and in different time it has changed a lot. At the same time, I think, speaking about the political things or what you were referring to, we cannot control it anymore. It's there, it's everywhere. So rather than try to push that away, try to silence it, and how to create this methodology or this technique or research that one can work with it, right? And okay, here we are, we're trying to become a mover, or we're trying to become an artist. So is it possible, whatever that is in you, in your belly, that you come with into the room, can we do something with that today in your own personal way, without a judgment, creating a safe space for them to just, can I do something with that? Can I create something out of it? Can art become from that thing that is cooking in your belly?
Thank you. Laura, do you have anything to add to this?
To be honest, I'm struggling with the changes. Yes, sometimes I don't know if I will be able to keep on. So it makes me very sad because sometimes I don't know. I try, I do my best. I have my best intentions, but then sometimes I fail, and then you have a lot of resistance. Yeah, and for me, as David was saying, I relate to that. I think I mean, there is not bad dancing. Dance is linked to anthropology, like it gathers together, and it's transnational, and it's body language, but still we communicate with language, and already like it's mainly the lingua franca is English, which, it's not obvious for everybody to understand and to use it in a very sophisticated manner. So that already, yeah, no, I'm struggling, and I think it's also nice to be able to say that. And then sometimes I go, wow, then maybe I don't want to go on, or maybe I'm doing something really wrong, or like I doubt a lot. I always have doubt I'm a doubty person. I doubt for everything, but still, and it makes me sad because, as I said before, for me, dance was a place, and these amazing generations, teamwork, I felt so sustained. It was really a place where we could push boundaries, and we were not best friends, like in the moment of, I became friends after leaving those companies, but in the moment, sometimes you need space, like you're dancing with somebody here the whole day, But it makes me a bit sad that there was really, what does it mean? I'm now in this thing, how do you make a safe place? What does it mean, safe place? Because, yeah, for me, dance was a safe place. I felt more safe in the dance school than home. And now I am trying to do this and to expand this, and then I'm being like, I have resistance. Wow, I'm doing still some. It's just very complex.
Yeah, and it's indeed a reminder that it's an ongoing negotiation, and we're all figuring it out together, because there's no manual that just arrives, but it's in constant flux.
But can I just add a little anecdote? Like to come, but I know it's doom and gloom in a lot of ways, but actually sometimes when that click does happen, a moment in the studio where it all supersedes all the caca, this is magic.
Yes.
This is magic, and I think there's times where it's the only thing that it makes sense to do in my day. I remember years ago, like when this 9/11 thing happened, I was in the middle of a creation, and we were really like, do we go to work now? Like, what makes sense to do? And we took like a couple of hours, and then I called everybody and I said, it's the only thing that makes sense to do today, is to go and like take part in our humanity. And I remember we made this material called Helicopters that was all about looking up, and so all of the heads were up, and it became something that was a strong kind of emotional moment in the piece every time we would get to it, and there were the traces of this lived experience that we all shared, and I feel like that's the meat of what we're trying, or the vegetables, depending on your proclivities, of what we're trying to do. Yeah. So I find that you feel it even maybe more preciously in a moment like we're living now.
So can I just, I promise I'm going to be brief. There's two anecdotes that I remember. It just recently I came across a quote that I didn't know of Reverend Desmond Tutu, and he picks up from a Chinese proverb that you probably know, which is give fish to a man and he will be fed for a day, teach him how to fish and he will be fed forever. And then Desmond Tutu adds, teach him to ride a bike and he will find fishing really stupid. And yeah, I think that there is something very relevant about those moments. For me, the question is how to bounce back, how to, like how that doesn't stay just as a fantastic experience in our memory individually or as a small community. There is a student at P.A.R.T.S. When students graduate, sometimes, very often, they reflect on what they have, the most important thing they've learned through the years here, and sometimes they express it. And I remember this one student who said at the graduation, well, the most important thing I learned at P.A.R.T.S. is this. Before I came here, I thought that gay people were sick, and I got cured from that. But the hard thing is that now I have to go back home where people still think that. So how will I do?
I'd like to put a pin on this point because in a way we will return from a different light in this and take what might feel a bit like a little bit of a U-turn, not a U-turn, but just feel a bit of a jump, but we will come back. And is that I would specifically like to ask Rakesh a question because your work brings together codified and contemporary dance, and of course there are logics that they're two different logics coming from different, I'm assuming they're different and coming from different history, but I'm interested in when you work on your technique that you've been kind of working with incorporating both universes, do the concepts of technique differ in these different contexts? Is there contradictions when you bring things together, or is it all actually quite coherent, surprisingly?
Well, for me, all that was a source of research, in a way. For example, speaking about codified, which is almost 3,000 years old practice, was created in a very different time and passed on in a very specific way. And how you study this martial art, even today, it's still how they did it 3,000 years ago. Or the yogic practice I'm talking about. So the things that I studied, they have very specific context, richness, value. How do you pass on the information, and how do you value knowledge? So it's a very different universe. Of course, I started learn this through contemporary dancer perspective, but then when I was learning really the traditional way. And so when I came to teach here, because of lack of money, if somebody asked me to teach a class, so I taught this traditional martial art class in a contemporary class, and people were like, "Oh, this is so cool! This is fantastic!" But at the same time, I started to hear this question of, "Yeah, but this is not a dance. This is not a contemporary technique. You're teaching a martial art in the contemporary technique," and for me, meanwhile, although these traditions are very old, but it was an ongoing research all the way along. So people were, having a conflict and learning from that and developing it further and refining and refining and refining up until 200 years ago where it stopped because of colonization. So crisis, right? And so many art forms like this suffered the colonization. And so otherwise, it would have continued. So it would have been contemporary today, right? It just got stuck, hence we call it tradition. So for me, when I started to teach, I okay, I could learn release technique, I could learn Cunningham, but that's not me. I'm age of 28, I already have all this imprint in me. But how can I make what these traditions are in me contemporary? And so that's where my question was, but it's like you have no idea what that means and you're searching in the dark. But paying attention to the room, the voices in the room, the different cultures that I teach, different generation I teach, they all bring different perspective on this technique. So in the beginning, it was just form-based. People, oh, I like the kick. You kick so high. This is great. I kick again. Or jump. So it was just like, let's go. This warrior kind of a mindset. But now it's shifting. It's like speaking about like what is the room today. It's a very different room. People are very sensitive, very inner questioning, observing. And hence, I could bring different layers into the practice. Like I said, my work is interconnected because in India, we never separate body with mind. We always said, if you look at Ayurveda, look at any study, we say everything is connected. Even you are connected, space is connected, etc. So everything can influence what's happening in our brain. So for me, then that became a kind of a stage of research. So when I arrived to a room where I devised certain tools, where it's just about connecting different layers of ourselves, but not necessarily imposing any sort of belief or value, but rather just pure. What is your mind? What is your breath? What is your body? What is your environment? What is the memory you come with? And how to use these tools to train from there. So hence, what I'm busy with, when you say contemporary, I find what I'm busy with is contemporary, right? And like we were just repeating again, this also changes a lot based on where we are in time. And when I arrive to a room, I suddenly see a shift in the room. Questions are different, situation, fragilities. So how to use all that to make sure this research stays relevant to the time, hence it stays contemporary in that sense.
I think there is also this, the change, what I perceive maybe, it's this thing of like the time, like how due to, the changes in society in general, but like this thing of like you have to invest a lot of time, and then results will come, they take time. And this, I find, this I see a difference. It's like even the confrontations I get, they want me to respond to that very quickly, and I need time. Like quit smoking it took me a lot of time and a lot of attempts, and I think now is a bit like, and sometimes I would call, like in workshops, I would call, now it's a bit less, but I call them, no, I don't even remember how I call. No, these shopping students, like they would come to shop the cool step, and then it's like, oh yeah, okay, a shopping student, because this I can get, and and this thing of like, I pay, I come here, and I get, and no, to embody, incorporate, this takes time. No, it's this consistency.
Just to respond or add on to it, like I said, like indeed the time, like when you look at knowledge, like let's say Kalari, it's so many generations have worked the entire life and passing on, and hence it has certain depth, certain knowledge in it. And here we are in a time where you get invited to teach in X and Y country for a week, and here you are, you have to teach all that in the 3 hours time, right? So, but meanwhile, this is the world we are in, and we are representing the teachers in this world. So hence, what is that I can adapt, or how to distill? No. Yeah, distill this information into a way that within that 1 week, what is that they can pick that they can be in their own research? So rather than them trying to become this Kalari artist or a yogi, how can they take that? I can imply in their own way.
This is the last question. So if you have any questions, be ready. But for this last question, we've already been touching on this, but I would want to frame it specifically in this way because in the second dancing dialogues, there was the question of inclusion, and that it was defined in a way that usually we might have a superficial understanding of inclusion as we do the same thing, but we do adaptations or we kind of like do small adjustments. But they were trying to rethink it in the sense of like, how do we change the entire structure so that it can provide a dignified way of being in the space? And these conversations have, of course, been evolving, I'm guessing, through your pedagogical career, because we're, as a society, making more efforts to provide a wider dignity for everyone. So I'm curious if how these questions relate to how you organize the space in the room, how you teach in general, and if it also reshapes the understanding of technique.
Well, one little, is that okay if I take? Yeah. Okay, all right. It's kind of connecting to what I said, is that as we are coming from very diverse background and we're starting to respect those diverse background in the room more and more. One example is that I call it a circle of basket. When we gather together in a circle, when we are feedbacking, which is that, like, my experience of this cup, my relationship to this cup is very different than where I come from because of my ancestors, my experiences and extra. So how to value all that in the room? So hence I create a space, I call it non-hierarchical space, even though I bring it as a teacher into that as a concept. But we try to exercise that everybody's voice is heard and everybody's investigation is respected. And the rest of us, including me as a teacher, to continue learning, is that just to listen, be available to what's happening, and not judging, not comparing, but just being there, and just letting that to become a pool of space of knowledge in a way.
I have two different feelings about it. One, I already mentioned, like, I have a little bit of an aversion because we've been through so many trends of trying to create respect in a room, where I actually think I always want to work in an environment where everybody feels respected and has their place. So I sometimes feel like formulas get in the way of the practicality of that endeavor. And although I think that also formulas and the discussion of formulas sometimes push our thinking forward in how we have to approach those things, but each time I want to meet a group of people and see who I'm with in the room and figure out how we can all respect each other and work in the most efficient and positive way that we can. Next to that, I don't know if I would call it a hierarchy, but I say a lot to students, like, you can't drive a car that's made of all wheels. You need a steering wheel, you need a motor, you need a tailpipe, and all of those jobs, the car doesn't run without any of those things. But my job is different than yours in this scenario. And that also is a liberty for you to get to think about your job and be fully in it without having to worry about mine. And it doesn't mean I don't want to have dialogue about things. I learn a lot from the students and it pushes my teaching in certain ways and etc. But I am trying to lead us somewhere, and the fact that I've had years of experience of trying to do this hopefully serves some purpose in that scenario. So I hope that that's also something that resonates in the room. Just as much as you were saying, I'm going to be sensitive to who's in front of me and what they bring. Sometimes there's some people that bring things. Like when I'm teaching composition, I'm hoping a student will somehow find, I gave them a little scenario. Maybe they're going to find the most interesting way to break that scenario in the most creative, fantastic way that I learned something about composition from their endeavor. Maybe what I have to give them is a methodology to find how they can make their voice heard the most clearly possible. So I guess I'm trying to say that I find that it's a messier work than sometimes we think of it these days, and that some of that mess is the humanity of the situation and the necessary messiness. A popular opinion, apparently.
We have to think about this. I need to take half a step back and connect, pull from a thread that you offered. Because I've been thinking all the time that there is a one very basic contradiction that I've been dealing with since the beginning, is the fact that I am extremely attracted to the experience of learning being first practice and only later on consciously aware, as in when you learn a martial art for years before the master says any word about it, but when he does, you already know what he's talking about because you've experienced it. I have a huge attraction for that, and I've tasted it, but just that, I've tasted it, and I can testify the logic of it. I felt that. But I never had the opportunity or the context to teach that way, because I teach like you, in periods of 2-3 weeks, with people that want to get their knowledge. But there is also something interesting, and I think there are opportunities, and I've engaged with those opportunities, and the idea of being aware of what you're learning at the same time as you're learning it. I think that it's not necessarily opposite, and it's what we have to deal with. So I've bet hard on that because, I needed. I've realized that in the environment that I propose, I needed the students to be aware and give value to what they're learning, not before they try to learn. I always say that. So what they're going to learn should not be an expectation or a reason to be motivated in order to learn. But I try to turn it into positive. Like, we can speak about what we're learning, and that speaking and that sharing will reinforce the learning process. Now, why am I talking about this? When I think of inclusion, and this was a very present issue when I stopped teaching about 2.5, 3 years ago. At that moment, I was thinking a lot about this because of all what I just said. My class was heavy on language, on awareness, on sharing knowledge explicitly through language, through commenting. I promoted that. I tried to make that be productive. But I realized also, gradually and eventually in very clear ways, how that would become a pressure, a non-productive pressure for certain people in class. And that's where I personally encountered the issue of inclusion. I never felt that there was a problem coming from gender diversity in my class or from physical diversity in class, but what we now call neurodivergence, and I think we're all neurodivergent to some degree in relation to each other, this became an issue that I started to be aware of, so that when I ask people, look, we're here, and we need to share, don't keep to yourself what you're learning, comment on each other. And, for some people that's evident, for some people less so. Some people, different people need different amount of time to express through language or to express at all. And that doesn't mean that something is not happening. How can I support those differences? I don't know. But it became gradually, it became very real to me.
Just a small thing to add. It kind of connects to what you questions and your statement is, although we speak about, I speak about this certain traditions and practices. Actually, in traditional practices, the teacher never teaches you, never tells you what is this for. So one way of including everyone in the room is just to show the form, you learn, and see what it teaches you for yourself. So every individual's experience is very different versus preaching. This is what you should be learning or understanding. So it's a same sort of notion of inclusion from silence. Maybe not try too hard to include, but just let them be. Let them just do, see what they learn out of it.
Does anyone want to add a bit more to this, or do we open to the floor? We can open. Does anyone have any questions that you would like to ask? Yes. Do we have a microphone for my microphone? Okay.
I'd like to, a question that I was with that I would like now, I think with the question of inclusion is the right moment to speak about it is the question about the relationship between technique and style. And technique and style. But through the question of inclusion, I mean, it's hard to formulate my thoughts, but I remember, Salva, you had this class where, if I remember correct, I mean, I never did it, but that you asked people to bring their favorite piece of music and they would dance on it, and then the task would be for the others to copy them, right? Which brings me to that can be a very technical thing that goes through style, but through the diversity of styles that people would bring through their choice. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate a bit on that, also in the question of inclusion, because I think inclusion is also about giving space to whatever preferences, backgrounds, etc. There are, but through this exercise you make them maybe not think about technique, but they have to they're using technique because they have to figure out how do I copy what I see.
Yeah. Yeah, the exercise is pretty much that. It's about looking at something like intuitive dancing on music, without thinking. You just throw yourself and dance to your favorite music, and it as an event in itself, it seems it's not evident how it would invite a technical eye on it, but if it's movement after all, and so I find it very interesting to analyze movement that is generated spontaneously and in a very well-organized way. When someone dances and is comfortable to dance to the music they like, the body works so well, and it's interesting as a technical territory to to look at that. In connection to style, you see, that's where when I was talking before about the issue of inclusion, I never felt a friction. I never felt that style generated a friction or a difficulty. So that's why for me it was so easy to bring in that exercise, and it didn't feel like off to the rest of the things we were doing in class. Obviously, if I would teach a phrase that I set myself, style would come with it, and then obviously there is the question, is that style enticing or motivating enough for someone in class who just doesn't aesthetically resonate with it? There's not much I can do about it. You can think about it, but I mean, since that is not the only thing that is happening in class, I thought we do it from time to time, and the rest of the time there's so much more time that you get to dance, and there's so many ways of organizing style-wise yourself according to what I propose as a subject matter for the class. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I realized at some point, when I started Set and Reset, I found it very cool, really, and so at that point it was 15 years old. Now it's 45 years old. I don't know. I didn't get my math right, but I really remember when a student years later, and I was already a teacher, said Set and Reset. It's very interesting, but it's interesting, but not cool so much anymore. And I'm like, wow, you don't find that cool? So these things change, and it made me I don't know. Well, that's that, times change, but yeah, I wonder. Sometimes I think how does that play in terms of your motivation and your approach and your entrance to physical material? Whether you feel that aesthetic resonance, And again, I don't have a conclusion, or I didn't articulate this or make decisions upon my material according to that, but I think that exists. It's like, I have many problems with ballet, but the biggest one is that I just don't like it. And I talked to an old teacher of mine, and she replied the same to me, and we had a very nice conversation about it. It's like, that's probably why it works so well for me, because I actually like it. And so, yeah, it's there somewhere.
Can I piggyback 2 seconds on that? Because I think the definition of the word style is necessary in this conversation a little bit, because it's a big word. And I think the way that individuals do everything has a style. When does the style go to a point of distortion, where it changes the nature of the thing you're placing the style on? And when is the style an improvisation or expression of individuality? And so I feel like that spectrum is also kind of an interesting question, bringing up the idea of ballet. I have a lot of respect for the ballet technique when you take it as fundamentals of movement. When you start to add certain stylistic things to it, it distorts the form in a way that can also become physically unhealthy to do. And that's just a kind of very practical example of like that spectrum of style, and how I don't know who decides with the magic wand, this is good style, that's bad style. I'm not saying that, but I do think that it is a spectrum in a certain place through expression, or the way that you do the movement differently than the way you do it, even if you're in unison doing the exact same thing. Like I had a moment, I met Diane on a beach many years ago in Miami Beach, who brought me into the Trisha Brown world. And it was very interesting, because the short time that I worked with Trisha, and with, I mean, not directly a lot with Trisha, but with the company, she had this meeting with me one time that I actually kind of, in retrospect, appreciate, because she told me that I was pulling her eye all the time, that I would do the movement correctly, but that I had this something that I was bringing to the movement, and she was in a stage of her work where that was not something she was looking for. And she asked me, if you stay here, I'm gonna have to strip you of that. Do you want that? And that was a question, I think I was like 23 at the time, that kind of blew my mind. I was like, how is Trisha Brown asking me this question, you know? But that kind of really talked to me something about style and about that individuality inside a form that I still have no answer to, but is a really interesting question.
Definitely. Do we have any other? Yes, there's a question.
Yes. So I have a couple of thoughts, and I'll try to summarize them, and I'll try to give them back to back. One was on the question, Salva, that you brought up about like the fact that your class was pretty heavy on language, and that language plays a role in learning, and I think you were then pointing out that in some ways you realize that that may be limiting the participation or the ease with which some students feel they can participate in the class. And I totally get that, and that then where my mind went afterwards was almost not really playing the devil's advocate, because I wouldn't hold that opinion too tightly, but I was thinking like language is like yet another mean to communicate and to share or some type of knowledge. And it is also maybe the case that for some people, language is an easier access, and actually depriving people from that language is non-inclusive in a revert manner. Like I actually don't mean to, do some intellectual trick, but it's like if I had been at P.A.R.T.S and nobody was talking all the time, in some ways I might have had a harder time entering in it. And it could be the case that some people would have had an easier time. So I don't really know what is right or wrong, but in some sense it strikes me that it's like a mean. It's not exactly gonna work the same way for everybody, but should the answer to fully subtract it, or to fully rely on it? So that was a thought, and also a second thought related to the discrepancies between the dance histories and like the training history of different students in some ways, I also feel that maybe language can be a bridge for students who have very little training when they come in P.A.R.T.S, which actually was my case. So having this kind of, you know, like almost upfront download of everything that my teacher thinks can also be helpful because I get, you know, things to relate to that I can start using for my training. So there was a thought, and I'll just give quickly another one, which was, I was thinking about this idea of like, you were asking what is contemporary techniques, and some of you were, I think you were naming, like it's maybe proposing tools such as awareness, I forgot a bit exactly, but you sort of made a list of sort of meta tools like awareness, understanding how things work, being able to observe oneself, dissecting how the body works, and so on and so forth. And I just wanted to share my experience that after P.A.R.T.S, I moved on to another school, and I did various type of street dance for a year and a half. And I was pretty puzzled that basically I was like completely lost. And some of these quote unquote meta skills that I had been practicing at P.A.R.T.S were more or less useful. And in many moments they were actually not so useful. I just basically had to, so I was thinking a bit, not sure, like, but thinking about the differences between technique and skills or meta tools and skills. I just basically had to learn some skills that I had not learned. And although I could think, oh my God, I learned so many things at P.A.R.T.S and it's so useful, I was thrown in a situation where I had to admit that it was not too useful. I just basically had to learn these new things, and that was it, sort of. And then they came in handy afterwards or somehow. Yeah. It's not black or white what I'm saying, but
isn't that a life? Isn't that just the experience of life? You create a foundation to step to somewhere else and have to recreate a new foundation and again and again and again. That's a beautiful story, I find.
100%. I was just reflecting about the whether we can think that contemporary technique is essentially a toolbox of meta tools that help you wherever you go and whatever you do afterwards. And I was basically forced to realize that in some situation it was less useful than I had expected it would be. That was
but I think anybody selling you that is a very good salesman that's not selling you the truth.
But just to respond to that, I must say there are certain things that I learned to refer to one of my teacher, Katie Duck. I came from a world where everything is set so crystal clear, and she said, go to the empty space and make a piece. Very opposite to what was happening, right? And then she was speaking a lot, she was throwing a lot of words and certain tools. I had no idea what this was. But after 15, 20 years, I started to learn what I learned 20 years ago. So I think for me, what I believe, knowledge is one, what's happening in this room, but the same knowledge, I could study something out of it 20 years in time. So it operates not necessarily in a linear way. That from my experience, it can go many different ways. Also, what you would research, suddenly, I learned this from David, and it makes sense. So never know.
Is there an interest to respond to the language question, or is it just a comment?
Well, it's a means to an end, no? And there's different means to an end. I think in the end of the day, you try to find different pathways with different people to coax them into or trick them into feeling something or having an experience, because that's something they can look for again. Until then, it stays abstract, and it's this description of a thing, this promised land you might find one day. And then one day you go, oh, my hip folds. Oh, that's what it feels like. And then it's yours. So the way that you get them there, I mean, you gotta take every tool and trick out of your box, and sometimes I have to call a friend. You know, like when you go on those quiz shows and you don't know the answer, you have to call a friend. Like this happens sometimes, yeah. I have a person with hyperextended knees. What do I do with this? I'm hanging over all the time. It's hard for her. What do you suggest? You know, like.
Do we have maybe one more question? Yes.
I don't know if I can use this, but I can try. Okay. So I was just wondering, because you mentioned about like the changing generations and stuff, and as a student I did notice that there's a whole lot of hurry inside our processes, because also as the field is increasing and lots and lots of people are dancing nowadays, which is wonderful, but also that means that either we have to create opportunities for ourselves or really compete for the ones that already exist. So I was thinking that probably creates a whole lot of demand from the students to themselves and probably towards the teachers as well, I could imagine. So I was thinking if you have some kind of philosophy to support, or like any idea as a guideline for you as teachers, how to deal with the question of value versus speed in progress, or like how do you relate to these terms and these demands from students and I guess the dance scene also.
Can I take it? For me, like what I try to practice, which I can just speak that, so I don't know if it makes sense. I call it holy time, okay? Every week, I'm just really going practical. Every week or every few weeks, let's say, I try to create a studio time by myself. Because I'm dealing with, like you say, so many fast information, so many variable information, and there's so much my brain is trying to process and needs and want and etc. So how to create a space to process? A space where what am I doing? What is my body like deloading or like trying to kind of give that space to see how can I either use or get inspired by this little information that I received. Can I distill that into something that makes my knowledge or my research in a way? So somehow, otherwise I found that, like you say, it's like, oh, I'm busy with this teacher, maybe through this teacher I can get to this company, and here I am with that teacher, and I'm somewhere else, or that company. So we kind of constantly going all over the place, but how to create, there is a moment where I can have my time, silence, or whatever, but try to able to distill and to connect back, maybe.
I think you can control time, and when I was a student and I would hear all the people bringing up the word experience, I would walk out the room. I would hate to hear that, and I think it's because I know it was true, you know, that. And yeah, and I keep on saying to my, you know, like past me that I should have been more patient, but that wouldn't have served me at that moment. You know, like I was not out there studying to wait for things happen, you know, for things to happen. So I don't know. I think that to say that, well, things will come and you will gather experience, it is a bit like shutting you down, like, you know, like it's not there yet, and that's not the right approach. But what I can maybe offer is more the sort of like the positive side of this is that I can tell you that my experience from first to the third year of P.A.R.T.S, because I was coming pretty much from zero, was a sensation, a subjective sensation that I was learning a lot, and that happens with everything, especially body skills that you learn. The learning, the feeling of learning is very high in the beginning, because, you know, like, and then it gets harder, then it slows down. You know. But even though I had that sensation that I was learning a lot in the beginning, now looking at what brought my biggest trip from a point of skill to a qualitatively and significantly much higher point of skill did not happen between year 1 and year 3 of P.A.R.T.S. It happened between graduation time and 3 years later, thanks to what had happened at P.A.R.T.S. So I think things need to sediment, and that does not mean that you have to wait for that, because they do sediment while you're busy putting them in there, you know, and gathering them. So yeah, patience.
there were very different times, and I was on stage when I was 18 already, and I saw these beautiful bodies next to me that they were so mature and so strong, and I wanted to be like them because they were like, you know what I mean? They had this maturity on stage, and I wanted to be that. I wanted to gain that experience and to also honor where I was, and I was like the real little child. So I wanted to be older. I remember I wanted to be already older. And you will, like it just will come, like the weight, the settle, the digest, like then you have to just like, then it is okay, like I want that. Well, in one day will come. It's a long-term investment. Is really, that's why I say this thing of maybe the times are not, the concept of time, no, this rush, this pressure. But it's just, I don't think, some things you really need to sleep over.
Just to add, maybe, I don't know if this makes us depressed or excited. I'm going to add something. I saw a post of a very well-known artist from India. She does physical theater, and she was giving this interview. And something beautiful she said, up until age of 40, we are training. We're training by performing, we're training, learning techniques, we're training by creating, we're training. And after 40, you become the performer with all that experience, which for me, it's like, oh, okay, so I still have time, I continue going, you know. So I think it's time, like you say, it's just working, keep on going, and every period we are maturing, we are learning, and we are unlearning.
For me, it's a big question that I'm grappling with, and I love to hear what everybody has to say about it. I want more time with you. I find that the things I'm trying to convey to you are things that take time and that I don't have enough time to dedicate to it. So I can plant seeds. Yeah, before I used to maybe be able to go with you and go, look, maybe that one needs a little more water, and oh, let's put some fertilizer over here, and blah, blah, blah. Now I have to go, hey, there's this thing that exists, maybe I can let you touch it, and then good luck, hopefully. This is a frustration for me sometimes. But at the same time, I also know that we're living in a time where programs are trying to respond to different kinds of information that they might find important to put in and balance how you can kind of try to do that. I also know that if I got the time with you that maybe I think would be ample, which is my experience in past years at P.A.R.T.S, for sure you would probably think you had me too much. Yeah, and I kind of prefer that. I always was jealous of Zambrano and these kind of things because he would come in his regalia and he would come for like 3-4 weeks, and everybody would Zambrano, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And I was the guy that made you eat your vegetables and do your homework. You know what I mean? Like, but I kind of accepted that position at a certain moment because I also accepted that some of the things I was trying to get to took that, and that you were gonna be, I had some students, for instance, that called me up years later who was resisting so hard the things that I was trying to give and thought they had me too much and blah, 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 ends up running a program in France and goes, hello, David, this is so-and-so. Firstly, I would like to apologize for how I was when I was in your class. Secondly, would you like to come teach in my formation that I've now done in the da-da-da, you know, and so like that whole thing of like time and who knows when it makes sense and when it doesn't and if it ever does for this person, but maybe that person, it changed their life. All of this is built in, I feel like. And that's why I'm talking about the necessary mess of it all, which I kind of embrace and think is super important.
I think as a teacher, I think you would agree that I sometimes even say it out loud, like, because sometimes I say something and I kind of know it's too soon and they will not understand, but I still have to say it because it will, who knows? I mean, I'm not in, I mean, we cannot do magic. It would be, I agree totally, this resonates. I also would like some time, more time with you, but I also understand the whole thing.
Speaking of time.
Yes.
It's time.
Well, I just wanted to give you all the opportunity. There's like a final lingering thought that you have not, maybe there's none, but just in case there's something that you haven't managed to say, since we're about to wrap, to open the space for that, and otherwise.
I have a very quick one, because in the inauguration and there was a sort of, not leaflet, but a book that announced the program of P.A.R.T.S in 1994 before the first opening. And there is this quote that lingered on, I don't know if it has survived all this time, where Aunt Teresa, and it's written out, says, "I cannot teach you to dance, but I can offer you a space in which share experiences, etc., etc." And I remember talking with Janet Panetta, who passed away, and years later, and she was like, "Well, I disagree. I think I can teach you to dance." And yeah, I mean, she meant that it is possible to you dance how you dance. We can look at it, work together, and get you to dance better, even according to your own standards, not to mine. It is possible to work on technique. It's not just to pass the time or to keep you busy. I think there's something significant that can be done in a technique class that will impact, in the best case, and hopefully will impact your artistic and expressive potential.
Can I have to piggyback on that. That was so great. And hi, Janet. I think I kind of agree with you. The thing is, we're also living in a time with a lot of great things that are coming into performance and etc. The movement language is being poorly neglected, like really neglected. And I hope that some of the things that I might throw out to you 10 years later, I come to see your solo and I'm like, wow, did you see what Milo is doing? Jesus, that's great. That's the next generation. That's the thing. Can give me a job. You know what I mean? Because I will still be dancing in 10 years. And we all look for jobs also. So, you know what I mean? It's not this kind of thing, it's done now and it's pa. You know what I mean? And I feel like on the level of movement, it's not old-fashioned to investigate movement. It doesn't mean it's uninteresting to investigate all the other things. But right now, there's a dearth of digging into what movement can provide. And I think in a time of the mind, which we're living in, which is super important and really great, and I love intellectuality and all of that stuff, there's something really vital and human about digging into that. And I hope we can find I hope we can find a thirst for that again. I would like to see it, and I'd like you to surprise me.
And I would just end up to that. I think if we, like, despite all doubts, we're still here and we invest in nice things because we believe on it. I still love it. I doubt, I get tired, but I think otherwise we will not be, it's a hard job also. So there is something there that I think still is relevant. No, that's what, and this also you have to kind of trust that, well, at least we believe, and then you will see that we're still here. Like, we believe it's important. It's magical. I started also teaching because it was so cool, but all these things that you said, these magical moments and this, it was so cool where I felt that I thought I had to give it back to society. Like, because it was also kind of an elite. Very quickly I was in these companies and these big theaters, and I don't come from that kind of high, and it was like, oh, I have to pay back, And I thought if somebody can feel what we feel sometimes when the synchronicity is there in partnering or in a solo, and when the show goes on, how it has to be, this kind of, without drugs, I thought we have to do more. It's this very healthy trip. Let's trip together.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for coming here. Thank you, all of you, for sharing your generous experience, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.